Super excited that y'all joined, and also very excited to get to introduce you to some of the new members of the Testmo team. It's been a very exciting year, a lot of growth. So super excited to get this opportunity to chat with y'all. I think we can go ahead and get started. So today we'll be talking about the newest features in Testmo we just released a few weeks ago. And we can go ahead to the next slide. I'll be kicking things off. My name is Matt Caponegro. I'm the Chief of Staff here at Testmo. And then I'll be passing the meat of the conversation to my colleague Simon, who is our lead product manager here at Testmo. We'll be super excited to get to talk with you throughout the session today. Before we get into the fun stuff, actually looking at automation launching, I want to quickly cover our plan for today's session. We'll have a quick overview of the automation launching features themselves, kind of how they work or what the goal is, some of the different setups that you'll need. And then we're going to go straight to a demo so you can see what these features will allow you to accomplish live. And then we'll finish out with Q&A. For the Q&A portion of the conversation, we're going to try using YouTube chats feature, the chat area that you should see right there in your YouTube live stream. If you're having any issues actually posting a question in chat, go ahead and you can send us an email at contact@testmo.com. And we'll see if we can answer your question there too. But hopefully you'll be able to try out the chat. And you can go ahead to the next slide, Simon. If you're able to use the chat, great. We'll be answering chats there. We actually have a few other team members on the call who will be able to answer your chats. We'll also be answering some of your questions live at the end of the call. So go ahead and throw your questions in there as we go along, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. And then, of course, if you ever need any help with automation launching or any other features in Testmo, you can just drop us a line at contact@testmo.com. I think without further ado, we can get to the good stuff. Simon, you want to tell us about automation launching?
I surely do. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Matt. So yeah, let's get into it. What is automation launching in Testmo? Well, it's a suite of features and functionality which once you've gotten them set up and integrated with your CI platform, automation launching will enable your team to launch automation jobs directly from inside of Testmo. So it does what it says on the tin. Why is that important? Well, what we've seen from teams is that there were some frustrations around using CI tools to execute automated tests. CI tools are definitely, I think, the best place to actually do that. But what we heard from our users indicated, maybe there were some ways in which the situation could be improved. So in particular, with automation launching, we wanted to address the problems of having to switch between tools in order to trigger automation runs versus, staying focused on other important testing work that was already being carried out from inside of Testmo. We wanted to eliminate the problem of having to wait for DevOps to trigger your test automation runs in the event that, testers don't have direct access to or control over the pipeline in which the automation tests are being run. And basically we just wanted to give Testmo users the ability to trigger their automation jobs at the click of a button from inside of Testmo instead. So conceptually, Testmo thinks of your automation runs in terms of jobs. And I think that's because that's what they typically, that's what they equate to when they're executed as part of a CI pipeline or job on your CI platform. So that's what this sort of model here is attempting to convey. Testmo's new automation launching features expand upon the GitHub and GitLab integrations that already exist inside of Testmo, and they give you the additional capabilities to configure targets for your automation runs, which are then launched from Testmo as jobs. Right, so that's kind of what we're seeking to communicate with this block diagram over here. Apologies if this all seems a little bit abstract right now. Rest assured, we're gonna demonstrate everything in a video that I've prepared in a couple of slides time. So before Testmo automation launching, then before we implemented the automation launching features inside of Testmo, your automation jobs would be triggered either on a predetermined schedule, configured in and controlled by your CI tool. And then, based on some event in the development workflow, a merge or a pull request, for example, those jobs would be triggered, or they would potentially be triggered manually by going to the CI pipeline or the workflow itself, and clicking the run button. Now with Testmo's new automation launching features, automation jobs can be triggered directly from a new jobs view inside of the automation area in Testmo. So you don't have to switch between tools in order to launch your automation runs any longer. And that gives your QA, your test team, full control over when and how they run their automation jobs. So that's pretty cool, I think. How easy is that to set up? It's all really simple. Like I say, it builds on top of our existing GitHub and GitLab integrations that already existed inside of Testmo. We've provided a bunch of documentation and some examples of end-to-end flows on our websites. And I'm going to show you what everything looks like in a video in just a couple of moments' time. But basically, all you need to do to get this up and running is configure your integration with GitHub or GitLab if you haven't already done so. Add targets for your automation jobs in Testmo, so the jobs connect to the jobs that you actually want to launch in your CI workflows. And then once you've done those two steps, you can launch your jobs from Testmo. So with all of that said, hopefully you get a sense of what we're aiming for here, and how it all works. I'm going to show you a video now that I recorded earlier with a demonstration of all of that stuff that I've just talked about. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so I've got my own Testmo instance here. And what we can basically see if I go to the administration area is that I've already got connections set up with both GitHub and GitLab And what that means is I don't need to change anything too much about them right now. But for the avoidance of doubt around how it's all done, if I click into one of the existing integrations, then you'll see for GitHub in this example, when I'm setting all this up, I need to point it at the relevant GitHub account. I need to install the app in GitHub by just clicking this button here, and then provide the necessary approvals in GitHub by clicking the authorize button and finishing up the steps in GitHub. And once all that's done, assuming that you've authorized successfully, so I'll just do that here and now. There we go, authorized and tested. So once all that's done, you can save the connection, and that's it. You're finished pretty much. All the instructions for how to do that are in our documentation site, so you can read those at your leisure. And it's a fairly painless process, as you've just seen, so long as you have the right permissions and settings for the GitHub account in the first place. And it's the same kind of deal for GitLab as well. So you need to provide the GitLab address. We're using a custom server for this specific example, but I've got a cloud one here as well. GitLab doesn't actually allow us to provide like an app in their space in quite the same way as what GitHub does. So you need to create that yourself and then grab the tokens from it. So the GitLab token itself, the GitLab access token, the PAT, I believe it is, the personal access token, and the OAuth authentication tokens here as well. So you'll need to set all that up yourself, grab the relevant tokens from GitLab and then plug them in here. And then once that's done, in the same way, you'd be able to test this connection and make sure it's all working. And you know, as I mentioned for GitHub, all the instructions for how to go about this process in detail are in our documentation area. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Once you've got these set up though, just to call out that there are a couple of other things you may wish to do if you're planning on using either GitHub or GitLab for issue tracking. Then you can decide which projects you want to use in Testmo and how those things map to your GitLab or your GitHub projects by using this mapping dialog as well. So that's something that you can do as well, primarily for the purposes of utilizing these spaces for issue tracking. So pushing issues and defects to either GitLab or GitHub. That's not the focus of this demonstration though. What is the focus is automation launching. So with GitHub and GitLab already set up, what I now need to do in order to make automation launching work is to define a target. And that's done in the automation area of the administration console. So if I go there now, as you can see, we've got this new sort of job launching and targets section here under automation. And I've already set up a few targets for my integrated CI platforms. For GitHub, I have a target which is pointing at my example automation launching repository. And it has a specific workflow which I'm targeting with my automation job, hence the need to define this target in the first place, because that's what we're targeting with the automation job. And because it's GitHub, I need to also supply a reference to the branch or the tag name being used in my workflow. Since it's a demo repository, I'm just using the main branch, but if yours has branches or tags, then you'd need to configure this accordingly. Yeah. So if we take a look at what that actually looks like in GitHub itself. So in here, example automation launching. Then I've got, my example automation launching repository here. So that's what Testmo is pointing at. Well, it's actually pointing at the build.yaml file here, which is the thing that kind of configures the workflow in GitHub. So this workflow is defining the sequence of jobs that GitHub Actions is going to perform for me. So in this demo example, we have a build job, we have a test setup job with various steps, including the creation of the test run, and this is where we start doing all the Testmo magic. Then we have the actual tests themselves, the execution of those automated tests and pushing the results to Testmo. Some cleanup steps, marking the test run as completed and stuff like that. And we have a deployment step in this workflow as well. If we look at that from a workflow model perspective, then it looks like this. We build, we test, we do the test setup, we carry out the actual tests themselves, we mark the test as complete, push the results to Testmo, and then we've got like this deployment step as well, which is obviously a dummy step in this workflow, and it's something that I'll elaborate on in a few moments. So what my Testmo target configuration basically does is kick this whole thing off. And it's important to note here that Testmo doesn't really care what exactly this workflow is doing, the workflow in GitHub. In principle, you could use it for all kinds of things, and we're very excited actually to hear about how you all end up using this functionality in the world. But what we mostly envisage automation launching will get used for is for this kind of testing scenario. Some pipeline or workflow which builds code, tests it, and then potentially deploys it to some environment for further manual or exploratory testing. So to assist with this process, Testmo gives you the ability to define and pass parameters to the target when the job is launched. So when you're configuring your target in Testmo, those things are referred to as inputs for GitHub. And we define those things in this tab here. So you can see in this target, I have specified that a data set and environment variable be passed to my GitHub Actions workflow. And they have values of large and staging accordingly. And this corresponds with the workflow that I've defined in GitLab. So if I go to my actions and if I were to try and build that manually by clicking this run workflow button, then you would see that I have corresponding inputs for my workflow here. What environment do I want to deploy to? Staging in this particular example. What data set do I want to use? Well, I want to use my small data set. And that's basically what I've instructed Testmo to use as well, right? So I've got a data set and an environment, but in Testmo I'm actually specifying that should be large, and the environment that I want my code deploying to with my large data set is staging. So that is all done. So I can save this, and with that defined, I'm ready to run my job. Just before I do that, let's take a quick look at a GitLab target as well, which looks pretty similar. So when you're setting up a GitLab target, you've got a project path or an ID setting where you're basically pointing Testmo at the GitLab repo you want to use. And much the same as GitHub, it's got a reference setting as well, so you can define the branch or the tag name that you want to use for the pipeline. And also, in much the same way as for GitHub, GitLab allows you to pass variables to your pipeline, which you can specify in the same way on the Variables tab. And of course, in both cases, you'll want to take note of the warning not to add any sensitive info in here because it may be disclosed in subsequent steps. All right, so with my targets now set up, I am ready to actually launch those jobs against the targets in the relevant projects. And that reminds me that there's another potential step here. If I go back to my GitHub target, then when I open up this dialog here, you'll see that there is a projects tab. And what that enables me to do is constrain the target for use only in the specified projects. And this is obviously going to be important for when a pipeline or a workflow is only relevant for a specific project. If you want to confine a target to only be used in one or more projects, then this is where you would do that. And in this example, you can see that the target is bound to my juice shop project, which means I can't use it in any of these other projects. In a similar vein, if I only want certain users or roles to be able to launch automation jobs, then I can configure that in the users and roles area of the administration console by assigning permissions to the relevant role. Then I can configure, I can ensure that the right users have the right permissions. So if a user is assigned a lead role, then they've got, in this example, the ability to add, edit, and delete automation jobs, whereas these other roles don't. I'm in here as a lead, so if I remove those permissions and go to the jobs view, then I can't do anything here. If I add back the permissions, then I should see that I've got the relevant permissions to add a new job here. So again, you can constrain where these automation jobs and targets are used at the project level. You can also do it at the user level. Assuming that my user does have the correct role, which this user now does, and the project is set up to use the right target or targets, then it's just a matter of going to this jobs view, which I'm now in, and clicking add job, or hitting quick launch to re-execute an existing job. If I click the add job button, if I've got more than one target configured, which I have here, then I can select which target I want to use from the drop down list. So let's choose GitHub. And once I've done that, I can verify the settings that are going to be used in my target. And so long as I'm happy with those, I can then go ahead and add my job. That's going to queue this job for execution, and in a few moments we'll see that it gets launched with a success or a failure message, depending on what the response was from the CI server, indicating whether or not the job itself was triggered successfully or not. For a successful execution, you'll get a blue cog indicating that the job was triggered successfully, and clicking on the job link will show you the details of what happened there. So you can see this was triggered with these settings, and you can go and look at that job in GitHub should you wish to do so. If the job failed for some reason, you'll get an orange exclamation mark. And again, clicking on that's going to open up the job details. And if we've been able to get some information from the CI server, then that'll be displayed here, usually with a response code and a message. And if you need to troubleshoot that further, then you can go to our FAQs page, which has got a bunch of useful information that you can refer to and help you to do that. Over the course of time, Testmo will remember what jobs you're launching and add them to the quick launch list, and clicking on those will relaunch the job for you with the relevant settings. I think you may reasonably ask at this stage what happens if I'm not happy with the job settings for my target that has been specified. And I think that the way that we envisage this being used is that, if you have different settings for different workflows, then you would likely want to configure multiple targets for the same workflow with the different settings that you want to use in it. And you'd give that some meaningful name so you know which target corresponds with which settings. And then, when it comes to actually launching the job, it would just be a matter of making sure you choose the right target from this list. Additionally, as I mentioned previously, the way in which we anticipate automation launching and these jobs being used is ultimately to run automation tests, which are then being reported back into Testmo. So if I, based on the workflows that I've just run, I can see that those were executed successfully. So now if I go to the runs and results tab, then I should be able to see that those automation job launches resulted in tests being performed, which were then reported back into Testmo. So here are my runs from those tests, which were created just a short time ago. And we can see that all of the results for those things are here for me to take a look at, which is pretty sweet. All right. Let me just try and get onto the next slide here. There we go. Okay, hopefully I'm back off of mute and you can all hear me. So I think the demonstration that you just saw, hopefully, touched on most of the major areas and gave you like a good overview of what automation launching is and how to set it up and how to use it and all of those things. So just by way of a quick recap, in order to use automation launching successfully, you'll need to first make sure you've got an integration set up with GitHub or GitLab or both. Assuming you've got that done, you'll need to add targets and the settings for those targets that you want to use. And you'll also want to configure your project and user permissions for those targets, depending on who you want to use them and in which project you want them to be used. And once you've got all of that set up, then you're basically good to go. Just launch the jobs from the Testmo jobs view as I demonstrated. And with the assumption that those jobs are performing automated tests, they'll do their thing, run the tests, and we would heartily recommend, taking the additional steps of pushing the results for those tests into Testmo for, visibility, reporting, tracking over time, and, all of those other benefits that you get from having your results inside a Testmo in the first place. So I think those are all the things that we've kind of covered in the demonstration. Just sort of starting to wrap up here. As I mentioned before, we've added quite a bit of documentation for the release, including end-to-end guides on how to set everything up in GitHub and GitLab, as well as run your automation tests and get the results reported back into Testmo using the Testmo CLI tool. I think those guides are fairly comprehensive. We've supplied repositories that you can use as examples with them. And you can just clone those repos, reproduce them in your own GitHub or GitLab workspaces, hook them up to your Testmo instance, and you should be more or less good to go. And I think that's a really good way of exploring this new functionality and just kind of familiarizing yourself with it. So I recommend taking a look at that. I appreciate these links aren't very easy to grab from a YouTube video though, so hopefully we will be sharing those in the live chat somewhere during the course of this live stream. So yeah, I think with all that said, I am basically done with like the content bit of this live stream. So if there are any questions that we want to take live, then we can do that now.
Thanks so much, Simon. Really appreciate both the overview and that awesome demo that you prepared. We've been getting some great questions from folks in the chat. One question I'll just pose to you. I know we've answered it a little bit, but lots of good questions from folks. In general, are we going to be looking into adding any other CI/CD pipelines in the future? I know right now with this initial release, the automation launching, we chose to launch with GitHub Actions and GitLab CI. Can you speak at all briefly to plans for future CI/CD pipeline support?
Yeah, we're definitely going to be looking into those, Matt, and thanks for the question. I mean, looking at the chat, it looks as though a few different people have asked that and have asked about a few different tools as well. So yeah, it's definitely something that we're looking at for the future. I think we envisaged that we would want to support additional tools, throughout the development process. But you've got to start somewhere, right? And we already had integrations kind of built out for GitHub and GitLab, so we started with those. I think, based on various surveys that we've carried out and across the sort of industry generally, we've got a pretty good sense of what the popular CI tools are that we may wish to support in the future. And we are, as I say, looking into that probably for our next year's, probably for a release sometime next year, but to be determined.
I know from some of our conversations around this release too, we know some of the platforms that we'd be looking at, like Jenkins is at the top of the list. And then I know some folks have asked about other platforms as well. So I'll just mention, if there's a particular CI/CD platform or configuration that you want to be supported with automation launching, please do send us an email, contact@testmo.com. That way we can just keep track of who's looking for what. It'll give us an opportunity to follow up with you if we have particular questions as we're getting into development, and maybe even offer beta access once we get to that point if you want to be one of the first folks to actually try that out with that new CI/CD pipeline. So don't hesitate to reach out to our team. That would help us a lot as we start to gather feedback from this initial release and think about how to improve it for the future. We got another question. Do we need to get different licensing to get this to trigger automation? Or is this going to be available already via the Testmo platform today? So on the GitLab or GitHub side, no additional licensing should be needed as long as you have access to GitLab CI/CD pipelines or GitHub Action workflows on your GitLab GitHub side. You should automatically be able to use this feature with Testmo. We're using built-in out-of-the-box functionality of GitLab and GitHub to use this. The only potential thing you might need is you might need to just double check that you have admin privileges on the GitHub and GitLab side to actually be able to enable the configuration, or you work with somebody on your team that does have admin privileges on the GitHub GitLab side to enable that. On the Testmo side, this automation launching functionality is already available. It's available as a more advanced feature. Because this is a more advanced feature, it's available on our Testmo Enterprise plan. So if you're on Testmo Enterprise already, you have access to this today. If you are not on Testmo Enterprise and you want to try this functionality out, let us know. We're offering a free 30-day trial of Testmo Enterprise for any current Testmo user. If you're interested in trying this out and seeing if it's something that your team would benefit from, just let us know and we can get you set up with next steps for that. No obligation on the trial. We can give you more details on email if that would be interesting to you. We got another question about where you can access links for more information about this. I know our team has been sharing some of the links in the chat. The links to the various guides and documentation that we put together are also going to be available in the description of this video. So you can go back to our YouTube channel anytime after we end the live stream. You'll be able to go back and rewatch the live stream or share it with folks in your team. And the documentation links will be in the video description as well. So that's another great place to get at those. There was a question about scheduling automation runs, for example, by a timetable instead of by user click. Simon, do you want to talk about, is that something that we've thought about adding to this functionality as well, scheduling automation launching?
Yeah, again, I mean, it's one of those questions that kind of came up during the course of development. I think we can certainly see a need for being able to do that. Definitely scheduling of automation jobs is something that we can see users would want in the product. So under consideration for a future release, possibly along with some of the new integrations, the other CI tools that we talked about earlier as well.
Great. I appreciate that. Then there's a question about how we want to launch. For example, if there are dynamic inputs, say there are multiple users who might want to select different inputs to launch, and especially in the case where you don't want to give admin access to all those users, what would be the best way for a user to handle that? I think you spoke to it during your demo, but I'm curious if you might just speak to that specific use case again, Simon.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I did speak to it during the demo because I could certainly see that it was a question that may come up. So I think as I mentioned during the demo, the way that I would envisage handling that, so the specific sort of use case that we're talking about is, okay, I want to add an automation job, but the job has some specific parameters associated with it. So let's look at the GitHub one as a good example of that. So, as I mentioned during the demo, the GitHub workflow that I set up for this purpose, and again, that is something you can replicate for yourselves by taking a look at the GitHub or the GitLab guides on our website for the automation launch and release. So it has like a deployment step. And during that deployment step, you can pass in a parameter that lets you identify, whether what size of data set you want to deploy as part of that step and which environment you want to deploy your code to, hypothetically for further testing. So those once you've set those parameters in your target, then they are basically hard coded, right? So anytime you launch this specific target, it's going to pass those parameters. But the way that I would envisage this being used is if you want a job that has different parameters than the target currently allows for, then you would just set that up in the automation area, right? So you would say, okay, so I have an existing target for GitHub, and it has these specific inputs. So large and staging, for example. Um, but I may want to be able to run a different version of that job that has a small data set and deploys to, I don't know, the integration environment, let's say. And you would just set up a separate target for that purpose, give it a slightly different name so you know what it is that it's doing. And then when it comes to launching those jobs, you would be able to select the appropriate target from the drop-down list um, with the settings in it that you actually want to use for that specific job. Right. So that's kind of how you accomplish what's being asked for there, I think, currently. I mean, it's possible that at some future stage we may allow you to pass in different parameters at runtime. So at the point of actually launching this job from the jobs view. I think during development, we decided not to do that because there are potential like security considerations or like compliancy type considerations around, well, how do you decide at the point of execution whether those are the right settings? What happens if somebody passes in the wrong settings? What happens if the person who triggers the job doesn't have the necessary visibility of what's going on in the pipeline to be able to determine what those settings should be in the first place. So all of those kind of considerations. And we figured probably the best approach right now is just to implement this in the way that I've just described. And maybe we'll add some improvements in a future release if we see a need for it. So hopefully that sort of explains that point, Matt.
That's great. I appreciate that, Simon. Yeah, and I can definitely see if your team regularly uses a variety of parameters, and this is the case with any kind of test data set, you start to get into a bit of a combinatorics where things can grow exponentially. I think also part of the reason that we had decided to make the parameters part of the configuration step, if I'm remembering correctly, was just to make sure that folks who know how those pipelines work are ensuring that they're setting the right kinds of variables for the rest of the team to use, but definitely something that we'll be taking into consideration. As you start to use these features, please reach out to our team and let us know what's working well for you and what would you want to see differently. We're definitely taking an approach on this release of let's get the release out to folks as quickly as possible, see what y'all are able to do with it, see what kind of benefits it's bringing you, and then also what you'd want to see in a future release. So don't hesitate to share your feedback. I think we've getting lots of great questions in the chat. Thanks again, y'all, for this awesome interaction. I mean, this is better than we would have hoped for our first live stream event. And thanks for bearing with us as we've done this. This is very fun on our side too. We've answered a number of questions in the chat. I think maybe just the last question that I was seeing that maybe we would want to answer live is there any limit to the number of jobs that you can launch from Testmo, or the number of jobs per user on the Testmo side? As far as I'm aware, there's no limit to that. I mean, really what we're talking about here is an API rate limit on the GitHub or GitLab side, but I don't think you'd reach that by automating from the Testmo UI. I don't know, Simon, if you want to speak to that, but from our side, no limitations on the number of jobs that you can be running. And really, when we're talking about launching and test automation in your CI/CD pipeline, on the Testmo side, what we're doing is kicking off a pipeline, right? Once Testmo successfully kicked off that pipeline, the rest of it's going to be taken care of in your CI/CD pipeline, your GitHub Action or your GitLab CI pipeline. So it shouldn't be a huge burden on your CI pipeline either. Simon, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
No, not really. I mean, as you said, Matt, there's no like hard limitation as to how many jobs can be triggered. I mean, there's some degree of like queuing of those jobs happening in the background on the Testmo side, as you'd imagine. So, yeah, I mean, if you've got a number of pipelines and you want to trigger jobs in parallel, then as long as you're not trying to trigger an unreasonable amount, then probably that should work absolutely fine. During our testing, to Matt's point, we didn't encounter any sort of hard limits around that. So in principle, you should be fine. But obviously, as you add, if in the event that you add a lot of jobs, then it might just take a little while to work through that queue of jobs. In terms of them being triggered from the pipeline in the background, or the queue rather.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Simon. All right. If you have any additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. The live stream video should still be available on our channel after we end the stream. So if you want to come back to that, again, share that with any of the folks in your team. Please feel free to do so. And then, yeah, I mean, it's just super exciting for us to see the questions that y'all have been posting already. We knew that this was going to be fun. We were very excited to bring this feature out, but also it's very cool to see all the different ways that y'all are wondering about being able to use it in your workflows today. So keep that feedback coming to us, contact@testmo.com. And the last thing before we sign off, just want to ask a quick poll, so keep an eye out for some quick feedback about this live stream. Would you attend a future Testmo live stream if we did this for other product releases, or just kind of general demos, just to get a sense of how effective this was for you? We'll give just a few moments. let people vote. Okay, great. This is awesome, quick feedback. Really appreciate it, y'all. And while folks are finishing voting, I'll just mention also another project we have in the works is we're starting to create some video tutorials to add to our YouTube live stream, our YouTube channel now that it's up. And those video tutorials will help you learn how to use the platform and use different features around the platform. They'll answer some of the kind of pro tip kinds of questions that we often see in our support team. So keep an eye out. We'll be starting to publish some of those how-to videos in the next couple weeks, and plan to continue to publish helpful content for y'all in addition to these kind of live stream events. So, okay, awesome. This is great feedback. Thanks so much, y'all. We'll go ahead and end that poll, and definitely keep that in mind as we keep looking forward to future product releases and events like this. If we don't speak to you before then, have a wonderful holiday season. If you're in a part of the world that's celebrating this time of year, if you're not, we wish you all the best and look forward to seeing you in the next live stream event. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.